Is this on? Oh yeah, of course, because you guys all have headphones on. I forgot. Okay. So we'll get started. We have about 28 minutes to do an incredible panel, which we will deliver on. So I just want to quickly start, and we'll just do rapid fire for this. You guys were introduced, obviously, but tell our audience a little bit about how you're involved in crypto policy on the Hill in Washington, D.C.
So as General Counsel of Avalabs, I spend some of my time running around Capitol Hill and other parts of Washington, D.C., as well as more globally. So I try to keep track of everything that's going on everywhere in the world all at once.
Norma?
And he succeeds in doing that. Norma Krayem, I actually am a lobbyist, a policy person, a regulatory person, working actually with Lee and Scott on all the legislation on the Hill. And I like to say, since I survived working in the federal government, it's a little bit easier to talk about what the federal government may or may not do in the future.
Yeah, hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Eleanor, Lee, obviously. A pleasure working with Lee for the past 6 years at Block 1 originally and now at AVA. So, yeah, I'm a senior policy advisor at Holland & Knight, which is a large law and lobbying firm in Washington, offices across the world. But, yeah, I think my entree, if you will, into lobbying on blockchain and cryptocurrencies started at a bar in Munich. And Lee knows this story well. I met Mike Novogratz, and that sort of opened up some opportunities with Lee in Block 1 and subsequently AVA. So we've been working together on digital asset policy ever since.
Amazing. Okay, so there's 3 experts, literally experts, on everything policy related on the Hill. So I want to get to the news first, which is that today we'll have another vote on the Genius Act in the Senate, and it will basically start the amendment process. So we had that vote on Monday. Basically, after today, we'll start to see senators put forward amendments to the bill and see what kind of writers, policy writers, they can get in there. I won't get into the nitty-gritty on that, but I do want to pose my first question to Norma. So we saw all the drama 2 weeks ago with the vote around the Democrats holding back on this bill. Was this just policy, or was this politics? How is this, as someone who's been on the Hill and someone who knows what's going on, from your view, what the heck was that 2 weeks ago?
You know, I think this is a really important question because what you saw in the headlines was simply Democrats block vote. And I do think what's really important is that was really not what was happening. What was happening is that Democrats in the Senate Banking Committee, when this bill was being moved forward, actually offered countless amendments to try and add certain things that they cared about. AML, KYC. And the way that process worked in committee is all the Democratic amendments were voted down. Every single one. Now, there's not a country in the world when you have multiple parties where people don't want to make changes to an underlying bill. And that's really what happened. Democrats exercised the power that they had. In the U.S. Senate, you need 60 votes to move forward. And they just said, we cut a deal, and that was to update and modify the bill. And unless you allow us to do that, we're not going to allow you to have the bill go forward. It is a really important difference. And what is, I think, that valuable is that there was a very good dialogue between Democrats and Republicans where they did update the bill. I'm not saying that that bill is perfect, and we're going to talk about that. But it's important that everyone has a voice. Stablecoins are critical legislation, and kind of that rush, we want to get it done, but you can't rush legislation that will basically govern everything that we do.
Let me just follow up there quickly. Is it a good bill, would you say?
And I'm going to open this up. I think it's a good bill.
Yeah, we can discuss it.
We need to be able to move forward on legislation like this.
I think there's a sense that it's not going to be perfect, right? But as long as there's a starting point and then there's momentum, is that how you view it? Kind of like, at least we will get something done and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah, I think, Eleanor, to answer your first question, it was politics and policy. It was both, right? I mean, there's a lot of frustration on the Democrat side of the aisle with some of the Trump family activities in crypto. And from the Republican side, too, quite frankly. House Financial Services Committee Chairman French Hill has outwardly said that the Trump family's engagement in crypto is going to make it more difficult to pass bills because it's going to raise the ire of the Democrats. And it has, right? Do I think it's a good bill? I think it's a good bill. I think it's going to get better through the amendment process. I think that's what the process brings to it. It perfects the imperfections. But I think most importantly is the simple fact that we're sitting here talking about the United States Senate having taken a vote on a stablecoin bill. I mean, this is a huge moment for the industry and for everybody in the room as we move forward and look ahead to market structure.
And just following on what Norma and Scott both said, I think this is a big unlock. I think stablecoins are the gateway to everything else blockchain. Stablecoins, right now at least, make blockchains work. They provide the currency. And so I think once this gets passed, huge unlock for the industry. Market structure will be the next unlock, but stablecoins is a necessary precursor.
So you think it's a precursor to market structure? You don't think it should have been done the other way around, where we had market structure first and then stablecoin after?
I frankly don't think the order is that important, as long as we get both of them done. But stablecoins arguably is simpler because it's arguably just a payment instrument. And so figuring out who should be able to issue payment instruments should be easier than figuring out what the broker obligations are, what the exchange obligations are, what the custodian obligations are, et cetera, around tokens. So I think it was just a question of which was easier, let's get a quick win. And stablecoins as the payment instrument really is a big unlock.
Do you agree with that, Norma?
I do. I agree with what Lee said. The way things work in the U.S. Congress is, and they made a decision to break these up deliberately. To Lee's point, stablecoins is more discrete. It's a little bit easier to get everyone on the same page. Market structure is very, very complicated, and that's going to take us a lot more time to do.
Let's talk about market structure a little bit. So we saw the discussion draft, which was an update of the FIT 21 bill, which came out last Congress. I've heard mixed reviews. I think at first people were very happy with it, just in terms of like compared to the FIT 21, it was a nice upgrade is what I'm hearing. I've talked to a couple people at this conference and they seem to be a little disenfranchised with it, especially when it comes to the DeFi elements. So I kind of want to just get all of your takes on how are you thinking about this bill? Is it a good bill? I guess I've asked that question about stablecoin bill, but as far as this discussion draft, are we on the right track?
My initial reaction is yes, we're on the right track. I think there's definitely changes that could beneficially be made going forward. You know, to me, there's two interesting things. One is the definition of digital commodity. They purposefully opted for a very narrow definition of digital commodity. By the way, that's something that Norma, Scott, and I have been arguing for 6 years on Capitol Hill. So it's kind of nice to see that come to fruition, especially from one of our first meetings on Capitol Hill together, where a prominent congressman said, I hear everything you're saying, and my brain just keeps saying Bitcoin, 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 right? So convincing everybody that we've moved so far beyond that, I think is really big. The second really interesting piece to me is how they're sort of divvying up the responsibilities between the SEC and the CFTC. It's sort of like the SEC is going to be the quote-unquote issuer regulator, and the CFTC is going to be the quote-unquote secondary markets regulator. Now, how much regulation is actually going to flow from that if the current draft holds? I think there's a lot. I think the CFTC will have to do a lot of rulemakings in that connection. They'll be able to leverage a lot of what already exists, but a lot of new rulemakings as well. So I think it's that second place where we're going to see a lot of the work that's going to get done going forward.
You know, maybe 2 points. I completely agree with Lee. And Lee made one point, I think, that is really important for anyone who wants to engage in the legislative process. And that is, we have been doing this for a long time. And when we work on these bills, just for people to understand, you don't just show up, talk to Congress, have a brilliant idea, and they take it and we're done, right? This is about building relationships and trust, right? We talk about the hard issues. You know, the culmination of looking at the market structure bill is all of the year's work that we've done and many others have done, and there is still more to do. 2 other quick points. The staff worked very, very hard on this bill draft, and they did update FIT 21. I think what is incredibly important, though, is we're in a different environment. We have different people in the administration. We have a different Securities and Exchange Commission and CFTC, and that's a good thing. We want to have a more collaborative approach with the regulators, and the bill really reflects that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is we do see some components that we actually advocated for where there's commonality and approach between the regulators, that's terrific. But where there's not, we want to maintain that jurisdiction. So there are rulemakings in that bill. Now, anyone who's done a rulemaking on the outside in the private sector, you know how exciting and fun and quick and expeditious, just kidding, that process is.
All the opposites.
It's all the opposites, 100%. But it is important for everyone to be able to participate in the regulatory process. And the last piece I'll just say, definitions, definitions, definitions. Everything stems from those. And I agree with Lee. I think there's more work to do. And we know the Senate is probably going to write a completely different bill. So, good for us to move forward, though. We have to have this dialogue.
Now,
Yeah, Eleanor, I think the market structure bill has a long way to go, simply from a process perspective. Right. It has not gotten the attention that the Genius Act, or the Stable Act for that matter, has gotten to this point. So it'll be a long summer in that regard. But the House committees are working very, very closely together again, which is encouraging. And something Norma just said that's interesting, and it strikes me because we could have been here 7 years ago, right? We could have been here. You had a Trump administration, you had a Republican Congress. We could have, jumped into this pool a long time ago, except for the fact that the first Trump administration was not supportive of the blockchain cryptocurrency industry at all throughout the first term, from Treasury to the White House.
I think
Very
Trump
little or
himself
no
said
interest.
He didn't like Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. So
Threats to
it's the administration's obviously changed their tune for whatever reasons you may wish to believe they've changed their tune. Some policy, some politics, some electoral, some fundraising. And I think that's important to note that the industry has come a long way as a player on Capitol Hill and in the campaign booth. And that's important to play both sides. And they've done a very good job at that, and we're now seeing the benefits of that engagement. So kudos to all of you.
Now, how has lobbying evolved? From your perspective, how has lobbying evolved as what you...
Well, I mean, I think Lee tells the story, and I've shared the story many times, and that is literally the educational process that we embarked upon 6 years ago. It's nice to see that it's had an impact. It's nice to see that the industry has continued to evolve under the fear of a regulatory by enforcement era for a time. And now, obviously, that's changed. There's still a cop on the beat. The SEC is still there. They're going to be there. But I think there's a lot more latitude and a lot more engagement with the industry at this time, and that's a huge difference. And I think that's true on Capitol Hill as well. I think it's true from the committee level, and now you have members of Congress that are not necessarily on the financial services or banking committees, but they're beginning to get increasingly interested in these issues because they hear more and more about it, whether it's from their kids or their grandkids, wherever that source comes from. It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a generational shift for sure. Go ahead.
The one piece I want to add to that is we have had a complete paradigm shift, though, in the politics, even in the last 3 to 4 years. And at the time, Republicans would be very pro, let's go now, right? And it was about competition and innovation, and those are all true. Democrats were a little more reticent. Democrats were saying, we don't quite understand this, we want to spend more time on it. They would still worry about the current regulatory approach, right? We're still talking about AML and KYC and rules of the road. What we didn't have was both parties talking about the messy middle, which is the way you make legislation and good laws. Now we have Democrats who are leaning in. They voted for, 71 voted for FIT 21. We're seeing Democrats on the House Financial Services Committee leaning in, which is a little bit different from the leadership on their committee. Senate Democrats also leaning in. And what I like to see, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not as if politics in Washington, D.C. is happy and there are rainbows and unicorns and we all have like s'mores together. But it is about making sure that we're having the right dialogue together and at least being able to talk about these issues. And I'm just going to give props to Lee. Lee has spent years and years uphill in the snow with no shoes, educating members of Congress and staff, talking about token classification and explaining things in an easy to understand way. And that's the key to success.
Yeah, and just to follow on Norma and Scott, Eleanor, our approach to lobbying has been very much about the education, because from our perspective, we're bringing something very new to everybody in Washington, D.C. And so educating them on how the technology works, on the promise of the technology, and on the fact that the bad stories they read in the news are not the only thing that's going on, right? There's good people, lots of good people working on this tech and involved in this. I think that's been the tidal wave that's really turned things.
Eleanor, real quickly, I think just to show everybody in the room sort of the influence and access that Avalanche has on Capitol Hill, it's important to note that, you know, your founder and CEO, Gunsir, testified before the House Finance Services Committee 2 years ago, not on one side or the other, but as a technologist, and answered technological questions that members had. And I think that's a significant step forward.
And I'm just going to add this. Anyone in the tech world, Norma's opinion only, you cannot show up in Congress and say, you don't understand the technology, you never will, trust me, write the bill this way. That's just not how life works. And to Scott's point, and to the work of Ava Labs, explaining the technology. If they ask you a question how the technology works, you actually should answer it. Like, help them understand so that they will be more of an advocate for you. And they don't need to be afraid of it. We want them to embrace it.
And I think one of the great things about Avalanche has been the use cases, because everybody on Capitol Hill wants to understand this in their terms. So yesterday on this stage, the CEO of Sports Illustrated Tickets was here. So we've used that example to help them understand the benefits of blockchain technology. There's a lot of use cases in this room and many, many more outside. And those are important, so don't be afraid to share those.
Now, there's another side to all this, which we saw during the 2024 election, which is the big money side of it. Crypto became a massive, massive donor to political candidates in Washington, D.C., to the presidential candidacy as well. How much of this Democrats getting on board would you say is fear of fair shake, as opposed to maybe getting on board with the education and maybe learning? How big of a specter is fair shake and the big money aspect of this?
It's a hard question to answer, Eleanor. I think there's been a lot of momentum building for a long time, and the money was symbolic of that momentum. And so I don't know that people are afraid of fair shake or whatever. But I do think what it showed everyone was that there are a lot of people who care about this. There are a lot of people who were fed up with the way things had worked. To Scott's point, the SEC under Chair Clayton was not a friend to blockchain and crypto. They weren't quite as aggressive as the SEC under Chair Gensler, but I spent many a meeting in the SEC's offices under Chair Clayton, as have many of my friends, and they were not friendly. And what we saw was this pressure building over a long period of time that needed a release, and 2024, the elections in 2024 were part of that release.
I'll just say one piece. The elections are about people's expression of their views, and it's in two ways. It's how people vote, and it's people's ability to contribute to campaigns. I agree with everything that Lee said, and I would just say this. I would not want people to believe that simply because we saw this massive uptick in political contributions, that is the key to success, right? Ultimately, the pressure building up was so strong because members of Congress weren't listening. Right? And so we saw that. I think that actually taught a lot of members a good lesson, which is you need to listen to what's happening in the business community, whether you fully engage or agree or not. And I hope, things level out a little bit, because we don't want those perceptions.
I'll just say that, in Washington, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. Money matters in U.S. politics. And did it buy the industry a seat at the table? Out and out, no. But it sure got them a comfortable chair.
I think I spent a lot of time at conferences, and obviously policy is sort of my bread and butter, but I spent a lot of time talking to people who really don't think too much about what's going on in Washington and how sort of the sausage is made, if you were. So that's why I love talking to you guys, because you can kind of educate some people who might just be like, I don't care what's going on in Washington, and why does it affect me? So why should they care?
The short answer is it's actually really interesting in blockchain, because blockchains are global, but country-specific things are happening everywhere in the world. And when you live in a world, a blockchain world without borders, you start to think that that's what your world is. But then when you live in the physical world, you actually have different rules and things that you need to follow. I think there's no right answer to the question of why people should care, other than the ripple effect of the regulation will be felt for everyone in different ways at different times. The last thing I'll say is, the way that I've always thought about what's happening in blockchain is we're building new infrastructure for the internet. And that's going to be difficult for legislators and regulators to understand, just like it's going to be difficult for everyday people to understand. The promise of all of that is something that I don't think gets talked about enough, and I wish more people would really be focused on what does that future look like, where we are all 24/7 acting globally through blockchain databases and crypto assets and tokenized assets and all of that other stuff, and how regulators and policymakers are going to grapple with that. That's the next big challenge. But let's get over these couple of hurdles first.
Yeah, I think media plays a massive role in the perspective, right? Or I think in the education process in Congress. You see the testimony of I think probably even Emin, right, on Capitol Hill. They cite articles by media about cryptocurrency. So we definitely play sort of a big role in that. How would you say the media, I guess, Scott, how would you say the media has done since Trump got elected at, kind of informing the public, maybe working with lobbyists? Are we getting better, on that sense? Because I think there was a bit of a disconnect for a while.
I think there's an educational process among a lot of members of the media as well.
Fair,
and I think they've gotten there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, let me jump back to your last question real quickly.
Yeah.
2 years ago, we were in Barcelona, and we had an incredible time. In the weeks after, months after, I talked to 6 different companies that at that time were domiciled in the United States and wanted to do business in the United States. Within a year, they had all left the United States and taken all their assets and money and investments with them. That was the environment in which we lived. Today, it's dramatically different. And so, everybody in the room and everybody outside, the United States is open for business. So don't be shy. Come back. We welcome the industry. We welcome the investment. We welcome the creativity and the technology. And I think you're going to find a good place to do business. I think from the media perspective, who knows? I really don't have a lot of good or bad things to say about the media. We all have our sources. But I think op-eds matter. I think, positive stories about the industry matter. And if we can place them in the right outlets, then that's a positive thing. If we can place them where regulators and legislators are reading them and staff are reading them, how do we get that message and how do we target that? I think if we can use the media to do that, online as well as, print and electronic, then it's advantageous to the business.
Just one piece I want to mention about why you should care about Congress, right? I mean, I hate to take us all back to Schoolhouse Rock and when we were children, why you should engage, but it is important because members of Congress and their staff really don't know everything. They do need the industry to come in. They need you to educate them and participate in the process. It is long, it is torturous, so you need some patience. But it is important for them to hear that. At the end of the day, we don't want them writing bills that they write in a vacuum behind closed doors. We don't want them writing bills just because one company was the most active. And the other piece I think you have to understand is a little bit of patience with the process. We need to make sure that when Congress is actually writing a law that you're going to be stuck with, that the law works for you. And the reason we spend time lobbying, whether that people like that word or not, is we're trying to make sure that the outcome works for you. Scott said, U.S. is open for business, come on back. And he's right. But come on back also means you have to participate. And it's so much easier to criticize from the outside. We see articles saying Democrats stopped this, Republicans did that. Everyone needs to have that voice. And I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not telling you that everything that you want will get in the bill, but that's why we do what we do. right? We actually get the things that we need done in good policy because we have people like Lee and Ava who will dig into the details with us. And sometimes it's a little hard, a little messy. Lee is very patient, but you know, that's the key to success.
And also follow the law, right? I mean, I think we've seen a narrative where the SEC is pulling back completely and we're not going to enforce any laws anymore and it's just open season. That's not the case. We saw the SEC file a lawsuit against Unicoin last night, so they're definitely still on the enforcement beat. So I think everybody has to keep that in mind as well.
Right, but they've also, on the positive side, they've also created a crypto task force, right? And they've opened it up to the industry and said, come share your information with us. And that's a much more back and forth, open door process both ways, right? And that'll result in a regulatory environment that we can live with.
And Ellie, just going back to your point about the media, you all play just as important a role in the education as we do, especially because your reach is much broader, right? Like I got like 10 followers on Twitter and 15 on LinkedIn. We started the Owl Explains project to try to reach more people, but you know, all of that needs to get amplified, and the media plays a really important role in that. And you know, intelligent reporters who dig in and learn and understand, they are frankly better educators than we are, because often they are seen as being nonpartisan, not nonpartisan in the sense of Democrat versus Republican, but nonpartisan or neutral in terms of, is the industry good or bad? That's not, we're not taking a position on that. You're taking a position on, I'm reporting the news and explaining things to people. So I encourage you guys with your new venture to continue on in that vein. It's great.
Well, just quick rapid fire to close out here. Will we hit President Trump's deadline of market structure and stablecoin done by August recess? In your legal, professional, Capitol Hill experience opinion.
I don't see how that happens, but you know, I've been surprised before, so I won't count them out.
Norma?
We find that the White House and presidents set deadlines in order for someone to even attempt to get there. So do I think that they're going to meet that deadline? No. Do I think that's a bad thing? No. I actually want them to spend some time on market structure.
I think we get Genius Act through the U.S. Senate before August. I think the House is going to take a little longer, and market structure reform bleeds into 2026, where we'll have the first 6 months to legislate.
Great. Lee, Norma, Scott, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.